Every month, you make yourself a promise. This month will be different. You'll finally stick to your budget. You'll stop buying things you don't need. You'll start saving. You'll pay down your debt. You'll finally get ahead. And for a little while, you do. Maybe it's a few days, maybe even a couple of weeks. Then something happens. You have a stressful day at work. Someone says something that hurts you. The kids wear you out. You get into an argument. You feel exhausted, lonely, unappreciated, or simply overwhelmed, and almost without thinking, you spend. It isn't always something extravagant. Sometimes it's just a coffee, a new shirt, something for the house, a late-night Amazon purchase, dinner because you're too tired to cook, a few things at Target you never planned to buy. Each purchase feels small, reasonable, almost harmless, until one day you open your banking app and your stomach drops. Again, you stare at the numbers wondering, what is wrong with me? I knew better. Why do I always do this? Why can't I just stop? Most financial advice gives you a simple answer. You're not disciplined enough. You need a better budget. You need more self-control. You need to stop making excuses. And while those answers sound logical, they leave one important question unanswered. If you already know what to do, why don't you do it? Why do intelligent people, hard-working people, kind people, people who genuinely want a better life, so often become the greatest obstacle to their own financial freedom? Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung believed the answer wasn't found in our bank accounts, or even in our spending habits. It was hidden much deeper. He believed every human being carries within them a part of themselves they rarely see, a hidden personality, one that quietly influences decisions, reacts to emotional pain, and often takes control without us realizing it. He called it the shadow, and according to Jung, until we become aware of it, it quietly writes the story of our lives behind the scenes, including our relationship with money. Because what if your greatest financial problem isn't your income? What if it isn't inflation, or bad luck, or even your budget? What if the person sabotaging your finances isn't the person you think you are, but the part of yourself you've spent your entire life trying not to meet? While Jung never wrote about what we might call a money shadow, his ideas about the unconscious provide a powerful lens through which we can understand our financial lives. Together, we'll explore why we sabotage ourselves financially, why shame makes financial struggles even worse, and most importantly, how bringing this hidden part of yourself into the light may become one of the most powerful financial transformations you'll ever experience. Because perhaps your financial habits have never really been about money. They've been about the parts of yourself still waiting to be understood. If financial success was simply a matter of information, almost no one would be drowning in debt. Think about it. Never before in human history have we had access to so much financial advice. Thousands of books, millions of YouTube videos, budgeting apps, podcasts, courses, financial influencers, entire television channels dedicated to money. Almost everyone knows the basics. Spend less than you earn. Save for emergencies. Avoid unnecessary debt. Invest consistently. Don't buy things you can't afford. The knowledge isn't hidden. So why do millions of intelligent people continue making choices they know will hurt them? Carl Jung believed the answer begins with a difficult truth. Human beings are not one unified personality. We like to imagine ourselves as one consistent person, one mind, one voice, one set of desires. But Jung observed something very different. Inside every person, there are competing forces. One part of you genuinely wants security. Another wants comfort. One part wants freedom. Another wants approval. One dreams about the future. Another only wants relief from today's pain. These parts don't always agree, and when they collide, logic often loses. Think about the last impulse purchase you regretted. Did you suddenly forget how budgets work? Of course not. Did you temporarily lose the ability to do basic math? No. Something much deeper happened. For a few moments, emotion became louder than intention. The part of you seeking immediate relief overpowered the part of you trying to build a better future. Jung spent decades observing this conflict. He noticed people repeatedly acting against their own stated goals, not because they were unintelligent, not because they were lazy, but because unconscious forces were influencing their choices. In one of his most well-known observations, Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Think about that for a moment. How many people believe they are simply bad with money? How many have accepted financial struggle as part of their personality? How many quietly tell themselves, "This is just who I am"? Jung would challenge that conclusion. He would ask a different question. Who inside you is making these decisions? Because sometimes the person who created the budget is not the same psychological part that's shopping online at 11 o'clock at night. The person determined to save on Monday may not be the same part making emotional decisions on Friday after an exhausting week. To Jung, this wasn't hypocrisy. It was evidence that the human psyche is far more complex than we like to believe. Modern psychology has, in many ways, confirmed what Jung intuited decades ago. Researchers studying financial stress have found that when people experience prolonged scarcity or chronic money worries, their mental bandwidth narrows. Stress consumes attention. Decision-making becomes harder. Long-term planning weakens. Immediate relief becomes more tempting. This doesn't excuse destructive financial choices, but it does explain why they become so much harder to resist when we're emotionally depleted. Have you ever noticed that the urge to spend rarely appears when you're peaceful? It shows up when you're anxious, lonely, overworked, ashamed, rejected, afraid. Those emotions are not interruptions to your financial life. They are often driving it. And this is where Carl Jung offers an insight that still feels revolutionary today. He believed that what we refuse to understand about ourselves doesn't disappear. It simply goes underground, where it continues influencing our lives, without our permission, and often without our awareness. That hidden territory is where our journey begins. Because before we can understand why we sabotage our finances, we have to meet the part of ourselves we've spent a lifetime pretending doesn't exist. Carl Jung called that hidden world the shadow. And once you understand what the shadow really is, you may never look at your financial decisions the same way again. When most people hear the word shadow, they imagine something dark, something evil, something dangerous. But that isn't what Carl Jung meant. The shadow is not the monster inside you. It is the forgotten part of you, the rejected part, the misunderstood part, the part you learned, often very early in life, was unacceptable. As children, we quickly discover that some emotions earn love, while others do not. Perhaps you learned that good people don't get angry, that responsible people don't complain, that grateful people don't ask for more, that strong people don't cry, that successful people never struggle. Little by little, pieces of ourselves get pushed into the darkness. Not because they're evil, but because we believe they are unacceptable. Jung wrote that the shadow is the part of the personality the conscious ego does not recognize. It contains qualities we reject, hide, or refuse to admit belong to us. But here's the mistake most people make. Whatever is pushed into the unconscious does not disappear. It waits, quietly, patiently, influencing our thoughts, our emotions, our relationships, and yes, our financial decisions. Because the shadow always finds a way to be heard. Imagine someone who has spent years telling themselves, "I'm not allowed to want nice things." Outwardly, they appear responsible, practical, careful. They deny themselves over and over and over again. But eventually, another part of them begins whispering, "What about me? Don't I deserve something?" One stressful afternoon, that whisper becomes a purchase. Not because they suddenly became irresponsible, but because a neglected part of themselves finally demanded attention. Or perhaps someone grew up in a home where money was always scarce. Every purchase was questioned, every mistake criticized, every bill carried fear. As an adult, they desperately want financial security. But deep inside, money still feels dangerous. So whenever they begin making progress, they unconsciously create chaos. Because chaos feels strangely familiar. The known often feels safer than the unknown, even when the known hurts us. This is one of Jung's most profound observations. We do not simply repeat behaviors, we repeat emotional realities. Sometimes, without realizing it, we recreate the emotional atmosphere we grew up in, not because we enjoy suffering, but because the psyche prefers what is familiar over what is unfamiliar. Even healing can feel threatening, because healing asks us to become someone we've never been before. Now think about your own financial life. Have you ever noticed yourself saying, "I deserve this. I've had a terrible week. It's only $50. I'll make it up next month." Those thoughts aren't random, they're clues. The shadow rarely announces itself dramatically. It speaks in quiet justifications, small rationalizations, tiny compromises. One purchase, one swipe, one click, one exception. Until suddenly, you're wondering how you ended up somewhere you never intended to go. But here's something I think is incredibly important. The shadow is not your enemy. Read that again. The shadow is not trying to destroy you. Most of the time, it's trying to protect you. Protect you from exhaustion, protect you from loneliness, protect you from feeling unworthy, protect you from emotional pain. The problem is, it often chooses methods that create even more suffering. The late-night shopping spree may not really be about buying things. It may be an attempt to purchase comfort. Status spending may not really be about impressing others. It may be an attempt to feel valuable. Refusing to look at your bank account may not be laziness. It may be your mind trying to protect you from overwhelming shame. From the shadow's perspective, every one of those behaviors makes perfect sense. They're survival strategies, old ones, strategies that may have helped you endure difficult seasons of life, but are no longer helping you build the future you want. And this changes everything. Because if your financial habits are actually attempts to meet emotional needs, then fighting yourself Shaming yourself and calling yourself lazy will never solve the problem. You cannot heal a part of yourself by declaring war against it. Jung believed transformation begins somewhere far more uncomfortable and far more compassionate. It begins with curiosity instead of asking, "Why am I so bad with money?" He invites us to ask, "What part of me is trying to be heard?" That single question has the power to change not only your finances, but your relationship with yourself. Because once you stop seeing the shadow as an enemy, you can finally begin listening to what it has been trying to tell you all along. If the shadow is only half the story, who is the other half? Carl Jung believed we all wear a mask so convincing that sometimes even we forget it isn't who we truly are. He called that mask the persona. And until we understand the role we're performing, we'll never understand why the shadow keeps interrupting it. If the shadow is the part of ourselves we've hidden from the world, then the persona is the part we carefully choose to show. Carl Jung described the persona as the mask we wear in society, not because we're fake, but because every society requires some degree of adaptation. There is nothing inherently wrong with having a persona. When you walk into a job interview, you don't reveal every fear you've ever had. When you meet someone for the first time, you don't immediately share your deepest wounds. We all wear masks. The problem begins when we forget their masks. When we begin believing that the role we're playing is who we actually are. And nowhere is that confusion more expensive than in our relationship with money. Think about the messages our culture sends us every single day. Success should look successful. Competent people appear put together. Good parents never let their children go without. Strong people don't ask for help. Successful professionals drive certain cars, wear certain clothes, live in certain neighborhoods, take certain vacations without realizing it. Many of us slowly begin building a financial life, not around reality, but around appearance. The frightening part is that we often don't even notice it's happening. Have you ever bought something, not because you truly needed it, but because you didn't want someone else to think you were struggling? Have you ever agreed to dinner, a weekend trip, or an expensive celebration, even though you knew it would strain your finances? Have you ever felt embarrassed to admit, "I can't afford that right now"? If so, you're not alone. And according to Jung, you may not simply be making financial decisions. You may be protecting your persona. Because the persona has one primary job: to gain acceptance, to avoid rejection, to preserve the image of who we believe we're supposed to be. For some people, that image is, "I'm the successful one." For others, "I'm the generous one. I'm the dependable one. I'm the one who always has everything together. I'm the parent who never says no. I'm the friend who always picks up the check." Those identities feel noble. Sometimes they are, but every identity has a hidden cost. When it becomes something you feel you must maintain, no matter what. Imagine someone who quietly carries thousands of dollars in credit card debt, while continuing to buy birthday gifts they can't afford. Not because they're selfish, because they cannot bear the thought of disappointing someone. Or the young professional buying designer clothes, while living paycheck to paycheck. Not because they love fashion, but because they're terrified someone will discover they don't feel successful inside. Or the exhausted parent who keeps saying yes because saying no feels like failing. The purchases are different. The psychology is exactly the same. The persona whispers, "Keep performing. Don't let them see." If they knew the truth, they might think less of you. But every performance requires energy, and eventually, someone has to pay for it. Sometimes, that payment comes as anxiety. Sometimes, as debt. Sometimes, as years spent chasing an image that never truly belonged to us in the first place. Carl Jung believed that the more tightly we identify with the persona, the louder the shadow becomes. Think back to the last chapter. The shadow doesn't hate the persona. It simply grows tired of carrying the burden of pretending. Eventually, it demands relief. Perhaps that's why someone spends impulsively after constantly appearing responsible. Perhaps that's why someone secretly shops after always taking care of everyone else. Perhaps that's why financial progress can mysteriously disappear after months of discipline. Because maintaining an identity that isn't fully true is exhausting, and exhausted people often seek relief. Not because they're weak, because they're human. This may explain something that confuses so many people. Why do we sometimes spend money trying to become the person we wish we already believed ourselves to be? We buy confidence, status, security, belonging, approval. But none of those things can truly be purchased, because they were never products. They were psychological needs, and when psychological needs are mistaken for shopping lists, there is no amount of money that will ever feel like enough. So, if the persona keeps asking us to perform, and the shadow keeps demanding relief, how do we ever escape the cycle? Jung's answer was surprisingly simple. Not easy, but simple. Stop asking, "How do I become more disciplined?" and begin asking, "What am I really hungry for?" Because beneath almost every financial habit, there is a deeper longing. And once you can name that longing, you're finally in a position to choose something different. Imagine for a moment that every purchase you've ever made came with two price tags. The first is the one printed on the receipt. The second is invisible, because every purchase is also attempting to solve a feeling. Carl Jung believed that symbols carry meaning far beyond their outward appearance. A wedding ring is never just metal. A home is never simply walls. A uniform is more than fabric. Objects become containers for psychological meaning. Money works the same way. Rarely are we buying only what we think we're buying. Sometimes we buy beauty products because we want to feel beautiful. Not simply polished, not simply presentable, but worthy of being noticed, desired, chosen. Perhaps the lipstick, the skincare, the perfume, or the new hair is carrying a psychological burden far greater than the product itself. It may represent the hope that if the outside changes, the way we feel inside will change with it. Jung might say the object has become a symbol of a quality we have not yet fully claimed within ourselves. Beauty, confidence, desirability, youth, power. And there is nothing wrong with enjoying beauty. The danger begins When we ask a product to convince us that we possess a worth we do not yet believe is ours. The same thing can happen with expensive items. A luxury bag, a watch, a car, a carefully chosen label. Sometimes we are not only buying craftsmanship or design or pleasure. We are buying a symbol of importance. We are asking the object to announce, "I matter. I have arrived. You should take me seriously." In Jungian terms, the outer object may be carrying a projected inner value, the status, the dignity, the authority, the sense of significance that we have not yet integrated into our own identity. So we wear the symbol, hoping others will reflect the feeling back to us. And for a moment, they may. But if the inner belief never changes, the symbol must be purchased again and again, because no object can permanently supply an identity we have not yet made conscious. The question is not whether beauty products or expensive things are wrong. The question is, what psychological work are we asking them to perform? Sometimes we're buying hope. Sometimes we're buying relief. Sometimes we're buying the version of ourselves we desperately wish existed. Think about a child who grows up feeling invisible. As an adult, they may become obsessed with success, not because they love achievement, but because recognition feels like love, or someone raised in constant financial instability. As an adult, they may hoard money, not because they're greedy, but because every dollar feels like protection. Another person, raised in criticism, may spend generously on everyone around them, not because they enjoy spending, but because generosity feels safer than rejection. Different behavior, same principle. The purchase is rarely the whole story. Jung believed the unconscious speaks in symbols, and money is one of the most powerful symbols we use. It can symbolize freedom, safety, control, power, love, worth, status, independence, success, or even survival. But symbols don't stop with money itself. They often attach themselves to the things money allows us to buy. Beauty, confidence, self-worth, radiance. There is nothing wrong with enjoying beautiful things. The problem begins when we ask them to give us what only a transformed relationship with ourselves can provide. The same is true of expensive possessions, a luxury handbag, an expensive watch, a prestigious car, a designer label. Sometimes we are not simply buying craftsmanship or quality or even pleasure. We are buying significance. We are hoping the object will quietly announce, "I matter. I've made it. People should respect me." In Jungian language, we may be projecting an inner quality onto an outer object. The importance, the confidence, the dignity, the value that already longs to emerge from within us. For a moment, the purchase works. We feel different, stronger, more successful, more attractive, more complete. But because the object never possessed those qualities in the first place, the feeling slowly fades, and we begin searching for the next purchase, the next upgrade, the next symbol, not realizing we've been trying to buy what the soul has been asking us to discover. That's why two people can spend $100 for completely different psychological reasons. One buys a designer handbag because it represents success. Another buys expensive tools because they represent competence. Another books a vacation because they desperately need peace. Another fills an online cart because for 15 brief minutes, they don't feel empty anymore. The object changes. The longing remains. Now ask yourself something. When was the last time you bought something that made you genuinely happy? For longer than a few days? For many of us, the excitement fades almost immediately. The package arrives. We open it. There's a brief rush of satisfaction. Then, almost as quickly, the feeling disappears. Soon, we're searching again. Not because we needed another purchase. Because the first purchase never addressed the real need. This is why psychologists sometimes describe emotional spending as an attempt to regulate feelings rather than finances. Jung might say something similar, though in different language. He would suggest that the psyche is trying to restore balance. The problem is that it often chooses the quickest solution instead of the deepest one. Imagine someone who's completely exhausted. They're overworked, unappreciated, running on empty. On the drive home, they stop at a store. They walk out with shopping bags. The purchase wasn't really about clothes. It was about comfort. Or maybe someone feels trapped, powerless, invisible. Buying something expensive creates a brief illusion of control. At least I can choose this. Someone else feels profoundly lonely. A package arriving at the front door becomes something to look forward to. Not because they needed another delivery, but because they needed something, anything, to interrupt the silence. Can you see what's happening? Money has quietly become a substitute language. Instead of saying, "I need rest," we buy. Instead of saying, "I need appreciation," we buy. Instead of saying, "I'm grieving," we buy. Instead of saying, "I'm afraid," we buy. The purchase becomes an emotional sentence. And here's the heartbreaking part. Most of us then judge ourselves for answering the wrong question. We say, "I have no discipline. I'm terrible with money. I'll never change." But perhaps discipline was never the first problem. Perhaps the real problem was that no one taught us how to recognize what our hearts were actually asking for. So, how do we begin changing a pattern that has been speaking through our wallets for years? Jung believed transformation always begins with awareness, not punishment, not shame, awareness. The next time you feel the urge to make an unplanned purchase, not to judge yourself, to become curious, ask yourself, if I don't buy this, what feeling will I have to sit with? That question may tell you far more than your bank statement ever could. Because sometimes the thing you're trying to purchase cannot be bought. It can only be acknowledged. If awareness is the beginning of change, what does actual transformation look like? How do we stop fighting ourselves and begin working with our own psychology instead of against it? In our final chapter, we'll explore Carl Jung's path toward integration and discover why lasting financial change begins, not in your wallet, but in your relationship with yourself. After hearing all of this, you might be wondering, so what do I do now? If the shadow isn't my enemy, if my spending has been trying to meet emotional needs, if my persona has been exhausting me, how do I finally break the cycle? Carl Jung's answer may surprise you. He did not believe lasting change begins with greater willpower. He believed it begins with greater consciousness, because you cannot change what you cannot see. The goal is not to eliminate the shadow. That will never happen. The goal is to know it so well that it no longer controls you without your awareness. Imagine driving a car with someone quietly grabbing the steering wheel every few miles. For years, you thought the car was defective. You blamed the road. You blamed yourself. Then one day, you finally noticed the other hand on the wheel. The problem isn't solved overnight, but now you know where to look. That is what awareness does. It gives you a choice, and choice is where freedom begins. Jung believed that healing comes through integration, not by cutting off the parts of ourselves we dislike, but by inviting them into conscious conversation. Instead of asking, "How do I stop spending?" try asking, "What is this urge trying to do for me?" Is it trying to comfort you, to protect you, to reward you, to make you feel seen, to give you a sense of control? The answer matters, because once you understand the need, you can begin meeting it in healthier ways. Perhaps what you needed wasn't another delivery. Perhaps you needed an evening of real rest. Perhaps what you needed wasn't another expensive purchase. Perhaps you needed to tell someone, "I'm overwhelmed." Perhaps what you needed wasn't another status symbol. Perhaps you needed to remember that your worth has never depended on convincing other people you're successful. This doesn't mean budgets are unnecessary. They matter. Emergency savings matter. Paying off debt matters. Tracking your spending matters. But those tools become far more powerful when they're working with your psychology instead of fighting against it. A budget built on shame rarely survives. A budget built on self-understanding has a chance to become a way of life. So let me leave you with something practical. This week, don't try to become a different person. Become a more observant one. Keep a small notebook or open the Notes app on your phone. Every time you're tempted to make an unplanned purchase, write down 3 things. What happened? What were you feeling? What story were you telling yourself? Don't judge the answers. Just notice them. Over time, patterns will begin to emerge. You may discover that you spend when you're lonely, or when you're exhausted, or after conflict, or when you're trying to prove something. Those discoveries are not reasons for shame. They are invitations to understanding. And understanding is the first step toward transformation. Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Perhaps, for years, you have called your financial struggle bad luck, poor discipline, a lack of willpower, or simply the way I am. But what if it was never your fate? What if it was a conversation your unconscious has been trying to have with you all along? What if every impulse purchase, every avoided bill, every moment of financial shame was not proof that you were broken, but evidence that a hidden part of you was asking to be seen? The journey Carl Jung described was never about becoming perfect. It was about becoming whole, about bringing light to the places within ourselves we've spent years avoiding. Because when we stop running from the shadow, we stop being ruled by it. When we loosen the grip of the persona, we no longer need to spend our lives trying to prove our worth. And when we begin meeting our deepest needs with awareness instead of impulse, something remarkable happens. Our finances begin to change, not simply because our spending changes, but because we change, not overnight, not all at once, but one conscious choice, one honest conversation, one moment of courage at a time. If this video resonated with you, I'd love to hear from you. What part of your relationship with money felt most familiar? Was it the shadow, the persona, or perhaps a family money script you've carried for years without realizing it? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone. And if you're interested in exploring Carl Jung's timeless wisdom and discovering how it can transform not only your finances, but your relationships, your purpose, and your understanding of yourself, I invite you to subscribe and join us here on the Sovereign Path. Until next time, keep walking the path toward wholeness.